You take my word and you let it saturate your life. Their greatest sin in their day was their estrangement from God. They still knew who he was. They still called themselves his children, but they were not living like it. Their relationship had been strained. They were separated. He said, in order for this to be fixed, in order for your future to be secure in me, then you need to walk with me. You need to live by my standards. Not by your own standards, not by your emotions, not by gut feeling, but you live by my word. Micah, who had prophesied probably 100, maybe 200 years previously, in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, he had spoken to God's people, and he had said, he has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord ask of you? But to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. He said, this is how you get the most out of this relationship. This is how you honor God and make him famous. This is how you open the doors for God to bless you. It is that you act justly, you love mercy, and you walk humbly. How do you act justly? You say that right is right and wrong is wrong, and you're going to live by it. How do you love mercy? That you look on other people and you recognize that they are in need and you want to pour out mercy even when they don't deserve it. And how do you walk humbly? You recognize that God is in control and you are not. And so you say right is right and wrong is wrong, and you live by it, and you love on those who are hurting and in need, and you let God get the credit. He said, that's it. That's how you do this. You look on the past, you live it out in the future, in the present, because the future is secure in God. In chapter 3, we had looked earlier, he said, I'm going to bring this blazing fire that will purify those who trust me, but it is a blazing fire that will consume those who disobey me. And so you've got to ask yourself today, where am I in this relationship with God? Have I recognized that my sin is destroying me, and I need to give myself and my sin and my brokenness to God? Some would say, well, I really need to get straightened up before I try to come to God and ask him to fix this. Well, it's like saying, I hope that when I go fishing, the fish will just jump in the boat already filleted. That's how I like to fish, but it doesn't work very often. God says, you come to me just as you are, because only by my power can you change at all. He loves you just like you are, but he doesn't want you to stay that way. Malachi is saying, you've got to come back. And oh, if they had known that it was going to be another 400 years before he would speak to them again. Would they have remembered the plan from the past to live it out in their lives in the present? Because their greatest need was to be reunited with God. And so what do? Well, for many of you in the room, you need to do this. Renew your submission to God's plan. Look in verses 5 and 6. Behold, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He'll restore the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so I won't come and smite the land with a curse. He said, your greatest problem is your sin. And if that doesn't get taken care of, I will have to curse the land. Not just the people, but the land. And the land would spew them out. They had already experienced that. In 587 BC, Jerusalem had fallen. Nebuchadnezzar and his forces had destroyed the city and had taken them captive. They had seen it happen before and still had not learned the lesson. He said, if you do not return to me, there will be a curse. And so he said, you need to renew this trust in me. He said, behold, remember what I've promised. I'm sending you Elijah. He had mentioned the way of Moses, that was going to be their structure for daily living. But Elijah was the great prophet. Moses was the great lawgiver. Elijah was the great prophet. He said, I'm sending you another Elijah who will prepare the way. We saw that at the beginning of chapter 3 as well. He said, I'm going to send my messenger and he'll clear the way. He was talking specifically about John the Baptist, who would pave the way for Jesus. When John was born, you can read in Luke chapter 1, verses 76 through 79. Luke chapter 1, verses 76 through 79. Zechariah, his father. After John the Baptist was born, he said, this is the one we have waited for. He is the one who will pave the way, who will prepare the way for the messenger God is sending us. He will send a messenger to prepare the way, and then the messenger who will speak God's word, the Messiah. They began waiting for him and looking for him right here in 430 BC. But it took another 400 years or more before he would send him. And so how do you live in the waiting? How do you survive when you have to wait 400 years? He's just told them in verse 4, you live by my standards. You live by what I talked to Moses about. You live like I matter. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, Jesus said that there are many who would call him Lord, Lord, but he didn't know him. There are a lot of folks who go through the motion and who seem to have religion as part of their life or some kind of structure or some kind of morality. But he said it's not about what you're doing, it's why you're doing it. It is who you know. He said, you have to know that I exist. And then you have faith in me that I will bless your life as you are obedient to me. That's what the writer of Hebrews talked about in chapter 11. He says, God rewards those who earnestly seek him. Rabbi Kushner has a number of books he has written, and I got a copy of one of those pages. I'm going to look at it tonight with my 5 o'clock class. But Kushner says there are many times where very religious people are some of the worst people you'll ever meet. We talked about that last week in chapter 3. And there are some that are pagans that have no desire to know God or follow him or be his child who are seemingly good people. They try to invest in their community. They want to have good children. He said, where is the disconnect? He said it is many times because those who are religious will admit that God exists, but he really doesn't matter. They want to maybe live by his rules or are motivated by their own selves, and they want God to bless them rather than their lives being a blessing to him. He said, God is, I'm sure, thankful that you would admit, well, I think God exists, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Malachi says, not only does he exist, but he matters because he is the one who will ultimately win. And he is the one then that needs to be in control of our lives and needs to set the pace for us. We need to live like it. Look back in chapter 3 because this is how you do it. In chapter 3, God says this. In verse 10, he says, bring the tithe into the storehouse. Test me now in this. He says, challenge me. It's a verb. He says, check my purity on this. If you will line up your lives, and he's not saying just write a check or bring the right amount. God knew that if they were going to bring the right tithes to worship, if they were going to bring the offerings that they should, then that would require that their entire lives be changed, that their hearts return to God himself. And he said, if you'll do this, you can test me. You can check me. I'll promise you I'll pour out blessing.